Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This video is just going to be a process video of this raccoon mushroom painting I'm doing for Game of Shrooms. If you don't know what Game of Shrooms is, it's basically a worldwide mushroom-themed scavenger hunt, and basically artists around the world hide their artwork, and on June 11th, they post on social media some of their hiding spots, and people get to hunt for mushroom-themed artwork. So that's what this whole series of mushrooms and raccoons and possums I'm doing is centered around. But anyways, let's just get back into the video, and I'll just be narrating what I'm doing. If you guys would like to have an actual step-by-step tutorial of how I did the fur on this raccoon and maybe the possum as well, I can definitely do that. Give it a thumbs up if you want me to make that a video or comment or whatever. As usual, I always start my paintings with watercolor pencils. You can use regular watercolors or even just diluted gouache. This is just the method that I really prefer because it allows me to darken specific places with the same color. It allows you to draw very specific areas of watercolor, basically. So right now, I'm just layering that on. I started with a blue watercolor pencil. Anywhere there's going to be black, which is going to be the raccoon's fur spots around its eyes and other areas like that. This just really helps with mapping out your painting. Mapping everything out really helps, especially if you're like me and get easily distracted. It's nice to have guidelines. This is essentially the underpainting. I'm also adding some watercolor pencils onto the mushroom. The mushroom is going to have a red top and a beige stem, so I used a beige kind of tan watercolor pencil and a red one on the top, obviously. And anywhere there's going to be a shadow, I did layer a blue watercolor pencil in those areas as well. After that, I'm getting a wet brush, so a lot more wet than when I normally use gouache, and I'm just blending out all of this watercolor. As you can see, my dog is just running around in the background. She might make more of an appearance as this video goes on, I'm not sure. I don't know about you, but after I do an underpainting, oh my god, it just really eases my anxiety. It really helps me just focus on taking one step at a time with a painting instead of just jumping right into it, wanting it to be like detailed and everything. It's less things to think about while you're painting. Because after the watercolor, underpainting is done, I already have a visual guide of where the black paint is going to go, where the red is going to go, where everything's going to go, and I also have a rough guideline on the values where the highlights and shadows are going. Everything is mapped out for me, so I can just slap on the gouache now and focus on the next step. Speaking of the next step, that is literally what I'm doing right now. I just got some diluted black gouache paint, and I'm placing that in areas where I previously mapped out with blue, and I'm keeping it fairly thin. I usually have the first few layers of my painting pretty thin, and then later on, the more detailed I get, the less water I use, because I end up working the paint in more specific areas, so I don't want it to get all muddied up together. And I would like to point out, I'm not trying to already create groups of fur and texture. Right now, I'm just focusing on the basic gradients of each basic shape that's going on in this painting. So right now, as you can see, I was like, okay, there's more concentration of black going on around the raccoon's eyes, and then it kind of fades out towards his neck into more of a gray. So I'm just focusing on creating that gradient and focusing on adding darker black where it's going to be darker, and then lightening it up where it's going to be blended out. I'm not worried about creating texture, groups of fur, anything like that yet. And I'm also doing that on the hands, literally all over the painting. I'm just focusing on the basic gradients, shadows, things like that. As I layer more gouache on, I am making that contrast a little bit more intense. The first layer was a lot more diluted. I was just putting down the basic general shadows and contrast. Right now in this layer, I have less water and more paint, and I'm just deepening those shadows in areas where it needs to be darker. I would like to add, though, that my brush is still pretty wet. It's not like dripping wet or anything like that, but it's not like damp. You know what I mean? It's just wet enough to have the paint be a little bit translucent still, but it's a lot more opaque than the last layer. And right here, I'm putting in the white fur. As you can see, it's not a perfectly white paint that I'm using. It has kind of a grayish brown hue to it. And one reason being, I like keeping my paint pan dirty. I might just do a whole video about my paint palette because I literally never wash it. I absolutely do not. And I like it that way because you can get a lot of really specific colors. And I like having some colors be this gray, brown kind of dirty color because it works for instances exactly like this that I'm going to explain right now. So later on, when I create the details of the white fur, I'm gonna need something for those strands to contrast against. So you don't want to put down just straight up white paint because you want there to be some very minimal light shading between the strands so that you can even see the strands of white fur. Does that make sense? It's like trying to draw a white line on a white piece of paper. If you draw a white line on a slightly gray piece of paper, you're gonna see the white line a lot better and it's gonna appear to be more textured. So that's why I'm doing kind of like an off-white gray color for the base, and then later on I will work up the layers of the white fur, and at the final stage is when I would probably use pure white paint to create strands of fur, really create that texture. That'll probably be in the next video I do, showing all the detail work I do with these awesome new brushes I got, by the way. I'm so excited to show you guys those brushes. Another thing I did was, according to my reference photo I was using of a raccoon, there's some slightly brown gray fur that slowly transitions between the black and white spots, specifically on his face. And it's not like a lot. It's not like it blends in a lot. Overall, the white and black fur does contrast quite a bit, but I just wanted to make sure I left a little wiggle room for any future strands of fur I wanted to make that was more brown. And yeah, I just blended some of those areas together to create more of a gradient. Right here, I think I got a little too carried away with all the white paint. I kind of went against my own explanation I said earlier on why I did a darker white for the base. So yeah, I wound up fixing that later. I'll show you in the next video. I fixed it with some watercolor pencils in the shade Burnt Umber. Anyways, I am now starting to begin the stage where I'm creating groups of fur. Not any details yet, but I'm creating more specific groups of fur in the direction that it's growing in. I'm also adding some more white around the wrists. Is it technically a wrist? A raccoon wrist? Whatever, you know what I'm saying. In this area, there's a lot more messy, tangled up, longer fur that's really hard to focus in on. So I'm taking a little bit more creative liberty in this area. In the next video, I'll go more in depth on that. If you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up so I know that you like it. And if you don't like it, put a thumbs down, I guess. I mean, you don't have to, but you can, I guess. I'll see you next week. Bye!